Hi, I'm Hector Del Castillo, Chief Product Officer at Bold PM and organizer of the Business Intelligentsia DC meetup. I'd like to welcome all of you to tonight's discussion. Tonight's speaker is Phillip Simulis, who is CEO of Simtelligent. And the topic for tonight is System Modernization Made Easy. Phillip will be walking us through the struggles of many organizations who are trying to figure out how to modernize legacy systems and the applications that go along with that. And he'll be describing some of the struggles that he's worked with some of his clients. In addition, he'll be sharing some lessons learned, and hopefully you'll have some questions. Much of the discussion is going to be anecdotal information of some of the work that he's done, but also he'll be talking about some real stories about user stories and what they found, things that they did not anticipate as they were starting to modernize legacy systems and still be able to get the benefit of retaining all the data that those applications have been processing for a while. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you Phillip Simulis. Phillip, welcome.
So thank you for the introduction, Hector. My name is Phillip Simulis, as the slide says, CEO at Simtelligent. And one area that we're adding a lot of value in now is the system modernization. And so I think the title is a little bit catchy. And system modernization made easy. Is it really easy? I don't know. Does anybody follow Jim Rohn?
I don't know.
I don't know if anybody out here follows Jim Rohn. He's one of my unofficial mentors. I don't think he's able to know that he's my mentor, but he has a saying. He says, getting rich is easy. I don't know if you'd believe that or not, right? And if people say, well, if getting rich is easy, then why are so many people not rich, right? And he says, well, it's easy because being poor is also easy, right? You got to do small things every day to get you to your goal of being rich, if that's the goal, right? The small things are really easy, but it's also easy not to do them. Mm-hmm. And I really take that same approach to system modernization. It's easy, but it's also easy to fail. Mm-hmm. And we'll look at that a little bit. And so one of the real questions is, in modernizing right now is kind of a buzzword, and everybody loves buzzwords. The question is, why even modernize? Why do we care? We good? Oh, sorry, I thought I heard something behind me. Why modernize? And the answer is, I don't know, right? Just because there's new technology out there, a lot of companies. Sorry, I lost. Are we still recording?
Yes.
All right, cool. A lot of companies, sometimes look at modernizing because there's new technology out there and they're not on the latest greatest. Never really a good reason to modernize, but really what it is you constantly adding business value, constantly solving customer challenges, lead you to really need to modernize because sometimes the legacy systems are hard to keep up with the trends, or hard to keep up with customer demands. So it's really some people's mindset can make it hard. It's not so much that it actually is. So there's a number of reasons why people fail. And one of the biggest things, in fact, this is actually one of our customers, is they're trying to do a cloud migration. So they're taking a system right now that's running on-prem, and they want to get it into the cloud. And one of the reasons that the team is really having a lot of trouble is they can't get any answers on what do you have? What are all the moving pieces? So number one, what is it that we have to migrate to the cloud? What databases are there? And nobody really has that on a piece of paper. Nobody can really answer that question. And so that's become a real nightmare for them. So you really need to inventory all your system. You wrote down, understand the overall architecture, right? So you have to understand what are your connected pieces? What servers do you have? How many servers do you have? What is your failover? What is your backup policy? Understanding the touch points. So what systems connect into each system? And you may think I'm making this stuff up, man, but when you look at some people actually modernize, or they'll take down a server and stand up a new one, and some of their systems break. Why do they break? Well, because they didn't realize that they had other systems that read from their database. or they have other systems that actually dump data into that system. And when they move it no longer works. Understand your nightly batch processes, your data feeds and your extracts. So understanding a lot of these things is really paramount, before you even get started. And if there's any technology people listening, guilty as charged, technology guys love to just jump in, at least programmers, right? Here's a problem, great, I'll just jump in and I'll solve it. You need to step back and get a big picture first. And so really what I wanted to do is wanted to make this a little bit fluid, because I knew we had a small audience tonight. Mm-hmm. And I know we have a small group here in the room. And obviously there's going to be some people watching this after the fact. And I'm hoping that they get the benefit of, we can talk about some of the system challenges that people here have faced, are facing, or conversely, what they did right to make it easy. So I have a couple notes to go over that may spark a little bit of conversation. That's the direction I wanted to take things tonight.
Yeah. So correct me if I'm wrong, Philip, but one of the struggles if I understand what you mentioned earlier, is that most people, most organizations over time, part of the issue is that they lose people or people retire, and these systems have been around so long and they're not clearly documented. When someone is trying to make changes, no one really knows exactly how it works because there's little or no documentation. And then most people that but were very familiar with how they were built and how they work have since left the company.
That's definitely true. It happens, especially with insurance companies, fintech companies that are running on really legacy systems, COBOL, JCL. Those systems really. A lot of people have retired since then. Mm-hmm. One thing that does surprise me is, and it shouldn't, but it does, is one customer hit our team one Monday morning and said, "Hey, the system's not generating email to certain people." In fact, one of them being the CEO. So this is a big problem, right? It's a high priority issue. So we're digging in. We're trying to figure out what's going on. It turns out that they have multiple domains. Okay. And they had made some changes to their Office 365 architecture over the weekend. And what they didn't realize is that they didn't also include this one domain that some key people were on. And so while we're looking at the application, like what's going on, we're looking through the logs and we're generating email, what's going on here. And what they found out is one backend change solved the problem and everything was ticking again. So, it can be key people leaving, mm-hmm. or it could be people really just, I got to be careful who's listening here. But, sometimes, people don't understand all the ramifications of just a little change. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really where a lot of systems really fail. But you're spot on with what you said earlier too. It's I have a whole number of examples like that. Mm-hmm. People leaving, and one thing that's super common, and we've probably talked about this in a number of our chats, is you have a group of people who were brought on, they know a certain technology stack, but they don't necessarily, maybe they can't or don't keep up with the technology trends and as technology advances. Take, for example, SOAP, everybody knew SOAP at the time. REST came out, REST web services, different, one's using XML, one's using JSON. People saw JSON and lost their minds. Like, what is this nonsense? It's not structured. It's not pretty. Mm-hmm. It is structured, but it's maybe not pretty. Mm-hmm. And so that's another big challenge really is, the teams keeping up. And I think the conversation a lot of times here with our group really kind of takes two directions, right? We have the commercial side of things and also the federal side. One of the challenges I see on federal, and I think we talked about this last time, was, and actually I do sympathize. So it's easy to look at, a contract staff for a certain contract and be like, oh, they're incompetent, they can't do it. But in all fairness, they weren't brought on to do, some of this modernization work. They were brought on to maintain a system. And so they brought on people that were skilled in this area. And all of a sudden, 6 months later, the customer's like, all right, now we need to modernize, So it's kind of to their degree, not their fault though, right? Mm-hmm. It does behoove people to stay on top of things.
Right. So that is really interesting because I think that it's almost like there's a gap between what the contract states, especially if it's a support maintenance contract, and the belief that modernization is part of maintenance and support. And it's almost like, no, it's not. I mean, you
Right.
think about, if really when you talk about legacy applications and legacy systems, they're part of an organization's infrastructure. So is infrastructure support and maintenance the same as supporting a specific set of applications or data sets that exist within an organization? That I think is what it's almost like there should be a differentiation between that. Updating infrastructure is different than regular maintenance and support of systems and data that are more modern, more recent.
Right.
And I think that in most contracts, it's like a gap.
Mm-hmm.
They think that, and the mentality is when everybody inside the organization, the agency, or even the prime contractor, is that support and maintenance work includes modernization. And that to me is, I think, the root cause of many of these things, because if you know ahead of time that to expect modernization at some point as part of maintenance and support, then you would probably put in there certain limitations or certain clauses that would say, up to a certain limit, or, we can only do so much. And maybe modernization needs to be treated specifically as a separate contract, or maybe a new task order that gets written up very specifically as to the type of modernization work that can be done.
Right. Yeah, I see some people are kind of taking that step.
Mm-hmm.
I think they've been kind of catching on to what you're saying. So,
Mm-hmm.
Some contracts actually have that language in there. And it also depends on the length of the contract. If you get in a multi-year contract, and it does seem that some are becoming smaller, right? So you have your 1 year base, and then you have your option years,
Mm-hmm.
which seems like a kind of a good way to protect clients from if they want to switch directions.
Yes.
Because in some cases, are you going to modernize? Are you going to go to which cloud are you going to go to? Are you going to go to an AWS cloud? Are you going to go to Azure? I know there are other ones out there. I just don't know anybody that uses them.
Mm-hmm.
Google Cloud is pretty popular, but quite honestly, nobody's asked us to do anything on Google Cloud. But that's definitely key. And I outlined one of the other challenges that we have is clients waking up in the morning and asking questions. Something happened is they considered an anomaly. Why did this happen? Nobody knows, right? And so almost to me, part of modernizing doesn't necessarily mean go with the latest, greatest, and the best technology stack or the coolest technology stack, but it's really about methodology. I'll give you everybody here a tip. Logs are great, right? I mean, it amazes me on how many people write an application, or how many companies or teams write an application. It solves the problem. It works until it doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
Until it doesn't work. Why didn't it work? Let's look at the logs. Well, what logs?
Mm-hmm.
Nobody asked us to build logs. And to me, that blows my mind as a technology leader that's not just built in. It's like saying my application is not secure.
Mm-hmm.
I thought you get that for free, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
not for free, but that should be an understanding as you price things out, or as you talk to your customer and I've actually had customers in the past on the commercial side say, we understand that we need security. We're going to get there, but we want to get things out the door and get people using it first. So we're going to do this later. And I did get this in writing, right? But go ahead, and we understand the risk. We're going to do this first, and then we're going to come back and bolt it on. Bolt-on security is never a good approach.
Mm-hmm.
But if you do know in advance when you're building something, you can build in the architecture to allow you to bring that in later.
So I wanted to actually ask you if you can clarify to those of us who are not technical, what is a log, and what would it tell you as an architect or developer if you were to look at a log?
That's a really good question, and I may be a little bit jaded more recently about missing logs, so I may have more sarcastic answers than useful answers. Log, you can have different levels of logs. You can have system logs, you can have application logs, you can have actual, the application writing its own custom log files. It's a way that when things happen in a system, they basically get recorded. It's almost like if you're going to track your nutrition plan throughout the day, it's like, okay, I woke up, had a glass of water. At this time, I had some coffee. I had eggs and toast, right? And you track that throughout the day. So yesterday, you can go back and say, well, what did I eat? And you go right back to it. And you can look. And so log files are similar to that, where you would you'll be able to go back and look at various days and see exactly what happened and when. Maybe intrusion detection or just did an email get sent? This person said they didn't receive the email. You could look in the application. Did we send it? Did it actually go? Did it bounce back? You could look at logs like that. And
so, in essence, a log is it's kind of like a tool that allows you to see what are the trends when the system is in normal conditions, and then allows you to now start looking at something that happened that is when there's been some sort of error or something that is not happening and that you were expecting to happen. Is that right?
Yeah, it's that's an easy way to sum it up.
So in essence, as long as everything is working normal, no one is looking at logs. But as soon as something happens,
it depends on who you ask, because security teams are going to want to not necessarily look at logs, but they're going to have software that scans their logs. So some people the smart people are definitely going to be proactively looking at their logs.
Got it. So if you have having like security minded in the way you are running your operations and your applications, you're looking at logs just for security reasons.
Absolutely, yeah.
But for lack of that, then no one really cares for logs when everything is fine.
No, you're right. You're absolutely right. So logs are great when you need them.
Yeah.
And there's a number of tools.
There's log mining too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Which they actually try to use for other like analytic purposes sometimes too.
Right. I was just going that direction. Same thing is there's some tools out there. And I don't know if you guys use any, Dan. There's tools like Prometheus. That's very popular. Are you familiar with that tool?
No.
Okay. That's one that plugs into system logs, and it gives teams an easy way to actually go through and query their logs and actually write dashboards and custom graphics around their log files. Prometheus isn't the only one. We actually do implementations on Prometheus. You have your automated build tools like Jenkins, and we may actually go to automated processes. But we're using like InfluxDB, which is a time series. So when you write out logs to log files, there's a tool called Telegraph, right? And it can actually pick up those logs and dump them into a time series database, which then you can use something called Grafana. I don't know if anybody is familiar with these tools.
I once went through last year a tutorial, like a 1-day tutorial on these two things.
What's that? Influx and Grafana?
No, Prometheus and Grafana.
Oh, okay.
Don't remember a lot about it, but yeah.
Yeah, it's.
Are you using them now in your current?
No, my current company, I don't even know what they're using. I'm still waiting for access. It's a federal contract. I've been there 4 months and I'm still waiting for access to the system.
As long as the check cleared, right?
Yeah. So I'm not sure what they're using for that.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes they use Jimmy on third floor, right? Hey, Jimmy, check out the log file. Tell us what happened. Right?
Yeah.
That seems to be the most common. And that's a few terms that are really popular now, and I'm sure most of the people either watching or here have heard of the different automated tools. You have your CI/CD Jenkins platform, which gives you your automated build process. So when it comes to modernizing, you start looking at what is the total cost of ownership. And a lot of times that's going to drive decisions that you're going to make around your technology stack, or do you need to modernize? And so modernizing isn't all about necessarily moving from .NET, the latest version of .NET to say .NET Core, or moving to Node. That's not necessarily what modernization means. It could be around your processes. So you can modernize processes with automation tools. So you look at how long it normally takes somebody, you used to be that you'd have a build master on a team, right? So somebody's job is to sit there and push a button and build software, deploy it out to a test server and notify the test team, okay, start testing, and they go through. So that you can automate these processes now, which, number one, can reduce costs if you're not having all the people that you normally would have. You still need a test team, but a lot of times the test team is actually building automation type scripts around, say like Selenium. So now you can do your automated build, and as you build, you get a notification if it's successful or not. If it didn't succeed, it actually can create tickets, like say in Jira, and then notify your team that there's a defect. If it builds out successfully, you can run automation test scripts, and you can also run automation security scans. So now you have a high degree of confidence that the code is secure, that it built properly, that it passed a series of tests. And there's different levels of tests you can do, and then automation of your deployment process. So if you're going to deploy to your test environment, out to your production environment, and it's really that simple. And in fact, I'm sure a lot of you guys know already, you can set things up so if you're using a code repository like GitHub, when the team checks into the repository, it actually kicks off that build process. So you have your continuous integration, your continuous delivery process.
Okay.
So, I don't know if you have any questions around that, but that's a big push right now to modernize those processes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I know that a lot of people have found that automating testing is more work than it initially, that it turns out to be. I've looked online, a lot of the discussion has been that it's been disappointing for a lot of people, that it doesn't catch everything, and that there still are a lot of manual processes that have to be gone through. But
no, you're absolutely right. And I'd like to hear more from you on that too, Dan, because I would agree with you.
mm-hmm.
I would also say human testers definitely don't catch everything.
Yeah.
It may be sold as the end all be all, the magic tool that's going to reduce defects down to zero. And that's not it, right? It relies on people writing test scripts, actually having test cases, and writing test scripts for those cases.
Mm-hmm.
So you're absolutely right on that. It depends on, and this goes to a lot of things. It depends on did you bring in an expert, right? Does a team have an in-house expert? Did you hire a consultant who's an expert on these tools?
Mm-hmm.
Because otherwise, just like a lot of other things, you can't absolutely be left holding the bag at the end of the day. Disappointed with your purchase, and like you said, now you have an automated test, but you can't trust it, so now you still have the manual test.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, well, what was the point?
Yeah. Well, they say there's always an infinite number of bugs in software, so you can always catch more. But whether it's adding to your value or not.
Well, it's an old joke, not to offend any users out there, right? But the idea is that you would make an application, idiot proof.
Yeah.
That was always the old adage. And then, it turns out that the world would give you a bigger idiot who could then break your application. Yeah. But quite honestly, and I've known a few of these people throughout my life, some people are really skilled, and I mean this in all positive ways. They are absolutely skilled at breaking the app. You have your development team, your test team, your beta testers, and everybody tests it. And there's always, it's really key if you could find somebody that you could hand them the application, and within 30 seconds, like, oh, broke it. Like, how did you do that? But that's an amazing talent, because that's probably what other users are going to be doing too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's I don't know if you have additional questions around some of these automation processes or modernizing.
So my question would be going back and saying, how good are these automation tools at ensuring that the proper logs are being created as well to help people, the developers, troubleshoot whenever there's something that goes wrong?
So that's a good question. I hate to say it depends. I mean, it does depend, but a lot of times, let's say, for example, your build fails.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you were to run a build, manually through your IDE, you're going to get, errors on these lines or warnings on these lines. Yes. That it'll tell you. So those are generally the logs that you'll get, so you can actually automatically create a ticket, assign it to somebody, and they can see what failed. Mm-hmm. Then they can pull that code down and actually duplicate, do the build, see the issue, and fix it. So from that perspective, they're pretty good. A lot of these tools that we're talking about depend on your logs. So now the build process, that's one thing we just discussed. But if we're looking at, say, like Prometheus, Influx with Telegraph and Grafana, those are going to depend on the logs that you're actually generating, and they're ingesting those. So it's like a lot of analytic tools. They really depend on the quality of your data.
Got it. So for the lack of any logs, they're not going to be as effective. The more detailed logs that you generate, the more effective those tools become as well. That
is true. And one way that can be looked at too is, if you go to a current site with current applications, current infrastructure, because not only can these tools like Prometheus, for example, not only does it monitor your application, but it actually monitors the server itself. So it monitors the operating system, your Apache, your IIS servers. It monitors the system as well, not just the application. Mm-hmm. So you can start to understand why the application failed. Well, maybe there was too many processes running on the server. Maybe too many users were hitting that. You may actually need to, in a perfect world, people would already be using horizontal scaling in the cloud. But in a lot of cases, even in the cloud, they're using, a vertical scaling model. Mm-hmm. And actually, I don't know if everybody here is familiar with vertical versus horizontal scaling. But if you think about vertical scaling, that's the concept of just building a more powerful server. Right? So I'm on a server and I want to vertically scale, or I might add more servers. So that's going to be horizontal scaling. So if you do like a auto scale group in the AWS, or a virtual machine scale set in Azure, it's set to, as the load hits up to say 75%, it spins up another instance on the fly. If it hits 75 again, it spins up another instance. All of a sudden, if it goes below 25, it starts killing off instances. Mm-hmm. So that's the idea of horizontal scaling. So that way, you're still going to want to monitor your system health. Mm-hmm. But again, it is going to come back to the quality of the logs that you're writing out. But the benefit on some of these tools, though, is, because a lot of times these logs aren't really that easy to read. I mean, they're not hard. They're just, if you look at it, you have to know what to look for. Right? You have timestamps, you have all this stuff. You have to really know what to look for, those little nuggets in the logs. Mm-hmm. And these tools just make it easy. And so it's one way to identify holes in your logs. If you're trying to answer questions and you can't easily answer the question, you'll know, hey, we need to modify our logs to start generating this type of data. Got it. Sounds good. Anybody, Uma, I wasn't really sure if you have any questions. It seems like right now we have, some additional time, and Philip, but I wasn't sure what else you might want to go over. But yeah, I just wanted to make sure that at least we give the audience a chance. So I just wanted to ask, if you're in the online, you can submit your questions, and you can either open up your mic and ask your question, or type it in the chat, and we'll make sure that we can ask Philip to cover that.
Okay, yeah, sure. I wanted to ask, what's one of your most favorite modernizations that you've done recently, like industry-wise, and the business case for why they decided to do a modernization?
Sure. Yeah, I appreciate the question. I think one that comes to mind. Do you want to talk about an implementation or one that's currently in design?
An implementation.
Okay, sure. And quite honestly, we might have time for both. But on the implementation, this is actually something I had notes on to mention. Is going to be doing operating system, I guess, image baselines. So the idea especially in a federal agency where you have many teams, or large corporate environment, right? You have many teams, they're all building applications and they need to run on very similar infrastructure, right? You're going to run an IIS server with .NET or maybe a Linux with Apache. Obviously there's other certain, Node, JS, for example, there's other options. And so what we did was actually created a series of templates, and it's still in progress. Some are complete and some are in progress, where it's basically using infrastructure as code, and it allows the team to run a script. And this is where it gets really important. They run a script and it generates an environment, right? Let's call it Apache or Red Hat Linux with Apache. It sets up that environment, it hardens that environment, and we're actually working with their security team to get that baseline approved. So what that really means is that anybody who runs this automatically has a hardened Apache Red Hat server. And the big benefit is, like, who cares? Well, a lot of people care, really. And the big benefit is they can get in the government world, they get their ATO a lot faster, their authority to operate. That actually can be, sometimes a 4 to 6 month process. And, there's a lot of details around that. Sometimes there's provisional ATOs, but it's a lot of time and a lot of money spent on getting an ATO. So this cuts that down a lot. What that includes, and I guess, let me ask a little bit more what you might, I don't know if that answers your question, because it's not quite a modernization as far as a single team goes, but it allows teams to have access to these hardened, modernized environments. And to give you another example of why that's important. In fact, we watched a team who was considering using this approach, and they were in the process of migrating to the cloud. And so we got on a screen share, and they showed us their process of deploying their application, and then also patching their system and things like this. And they had files that had scripts, and one guy would just copy, he'd copy these scripts and paste it. Well, let's first create the VM. Create the VM, using the portal in the cloud. And so you click here, create a new VM, you fill out your options, and he's sitting there, oh, what did I do next? And he's looking at his old screenshots that he took, but the UI changed in the cloud environment. And so the buttons weren't where they used to be, the options were different, and he's confused. And this is like, how do you create a duplicate environment of your previous environment? So then after this gets stood up, now he's actually configuring it. And he's just copying these lines of, these command lines and pasting them in there. And the funniest part was they weren't in order. Like, yeah. So copy, paste. Oh, yeah, I need this one first. Now I'm back. I'm like, how do you duplicate that, right? It's job security.
Right.
So what we actually did was built out a full set of scripts that automated that entire process. And so I'm not sure if that answers your question, but to me, that was my favorite, because it gave them something repeatable, right? You run a script, and by the way, other areas let's just say other areas were able to use the same, but it's something that's repeatable, and you get the same results every time. It either passes or fails. If anybody's managed multiple servers before, it's easy. Whether it's different environments between dev, test, staging, and prod, or even 2 prod servers, it's like something works on this server, it doesn't work here. What's different? And sometimes you'll spend days trying to figure out what configuration file changed between these two. Like, when did it change? Who changed it? And using this type of approach, you don't have to worry about that.
Yep, that was a great example. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Are you doing any modernizing work yourself?
Well, often work on data projects. So yes.
Do you have any success stories yet, or any nightmare stories?
Oh, not really. Well, I work on the recruiting side, so I'm more on the HR side. So it's a little indirect, but yeah, my candidates will tell me horror stories all the time. But yeah, we really just look for, good systems, good technologies, like a good architecture, basically, and then things go more smoothly.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say too, when you're looking at candidates and they tell you these horror stories, just make sure they're not the cause of them. Might be a reason they're looking for a job.
Yeah.
No, I'm joking. Only partially. No. I definitely, I appreciate that question. There's definitely some modernization stories that come to mind, and it's always interesting sometimes why people choose not to. They identify the pain, it's recurring, but they still choose to. And quite honestly, I think that some of it comes down to who do you trust? Right. And not even who do you trust, but who are you friends with?
There are a lot of horror stories about modernizations that don't work, particularly in the federal government. I know that, for instance, at the last place I was working, there was some program it was a DHS thing, and they had some program that was going to make all these files electronic. These paper files electronic, and it went on for like, I don't know, 7, 8 years, and they just canceled it because they said it's not going to work. So, I mean, the government's unusually big and bureaucratic, but it does seem to me that there's a lot of stories out there where they say we're going to modernize, and then it ends up, either it doesn't work or it costs, 10 times more and takes 10 times longer than.
Yeah, I think that's
That was
pretty
fun.
common.
Yeah.
It takes longer and costs more. I think it's
Yeah.
definitely pretty common. Sometimes people can put out a great sales presentation.
Yeah.
And, hey, we can do this. Okay, great. And then they get so far along, they're like, well, if you want to continue, we need more money. And it's almost like that carrot and the stick approach, right? I mean, it's one of the things I can't stand. And something, when you were saying that, Dan, something else came to mind, and I didn't write it down, and I can't think of it at the moment. One thing too that I wrote down to talk about a little bit. I know we touched on this last time. This goes along with like, why is it hard? And a lot of times it's if you look at environments, they have a mix of technology. So it's not just, hey, one application that we have to modernize. But you may have some Java applications, .NET applications. You have some backend scripts. If you have a lot of different things working, and it's scary for some people. Quite honestly, it's scary to touch it. And I've seen. I wrote down a diagram here where you have. I wrote down old tool, ugly database, and in fact, actually, one environment they have it's quite an old tool. Old doesn't necessarily mean bad. If anyone's old, I don't want to offend anybody. I'm kidding. But old tool, it has I wrote down ugly database, but it's a database that was basically an Excel file, and they started dumping it into a database. It's not even meant to be really queried very easily. And because of that, they had to generate an ETL process to get that data and actually export it out to a relational database. And now that they have that second database, they have reports that hit against it. Other tools use it. People use it for ad hoc queries, and they really are considering. Well, they would definitely like to get rid of the tool. Let's put it that way. The problem is the cost and the pain of moving away from that tool, because that secondary database, it wouldn't be necessary anymore. But you have so many things connected to it, and they're not really sure what all's connected, what mission critical pieces are connected. And if we unplug it, there'll probably be a few that stop working. Mm-hmm. And it's really, for them, it's easier just to limp along with those problems.
Yeah, I mean, that reminds me of something I read the other day about. He told me, the guy was saying that there's all these stories about how like the whole company runs on Excel spreadsheets. Somebody comes and they modernize it, and they take the stuff out of the Excel spreadsheets. And then you go back to the company like 4 years later, and everybody's still using the spreadsheets, and they're ignoring the system. That was great.
Yeah, that's super common too.
Yeah,
that adoption, and quite honestly too, for the people watching here that have joined us or are going to watch later, that is always one of the challenges, even around some of the really cool stuff we've done on modernizing. And the description that I provided just a short while ago about one of my favorite cases. You can build all these really cool things. And in fact, one of the things we're working on right now, and it's almost completed, is for a federal client, is a Kubernetes baseline built on AWS. And so I know that they have Red Hat's like OpenShift, and they have other tools, but this is purely Kubernetes that runs on AWS. And it comes hardened, and it's going to be ATO ready. Mm-hmm. And so this is huge, because Kubernetes is not easy. And it's not uncommon for it to take 6 months for people to get in and actually get it configured and get it working in their environment. So if you could run this quickly, I mean, literally you run the script within minutes and you're good to go. It's pretty amazing. The question is, how do you make sure people use it, right? I mean, because so many teams, even though they have these, for whatever reason, want to do it their own way. And is, like the way that we've done is it's not like it's blessed by security. It's a solid way of doing it. We use a lot of industry enterprise level tools like Terraform, for example, with Ansible, with some custom scripts where needed. So it's not like we created some kind of thing that nobody else is doing. So it blows my mind is, why wouldn't you use this? And the answer is really simple. I don't know. This isn't like a trick question. I don't know if you, Hector, if you have any guesses on why people wouldn't use these tools and scripts that make their life easier.
Well, I think that it can vary depending on the task at hand. But what I've seen is that people, once they feel comfortable with a specific tool, they don't want to move away from it, right?
Ding,
and,
ding,
and
ding.
I think that's the the mentality for most people that want to stay using a spreadsheet compared to some other application that they don't even know who developed it, how it's developed, and how reliable it is. All they know is that they can easily reproduce the same information using their spreadsheet, and they can change it as needed without having to submit a request to development so they can change the application.
Well, it's not without pain points though, because teams that share spreadsheets constantly, where's the latest, greatest, right? I emailed you a copy. Oh, but he updated it.
That's correct.
It's a nightmare.
Yep.
So they're still using this painful product.
Yes. Yes. And I think that it really comes down to, where the majority of the group, what they feel comfortable, the tool that they can feel comfortable with, that's the one that kind of stays and survives pretty much anything else, even if it's newer stuff or even using proven technology, proven methodologies.
No, I definitely agree with that. In the case of what we're doing around the automation processes, quite honestly, these teams don't know these tools. That so when you open up these scripts and show them, hey, here's how you use it, they look at this and it's basically foreign to them. Mm-hmm. And it's easier for them to, like you said, use what they're familiar with, which is, hey, I took some screenshots and I have a file that I copy and paste the commands from, and that works. Mm-hmm. It works. It's not efficient. It's not a good use of people's time or clients' money, but you're absolutely right. It takes sometimes, when you talk about training, sometimes people rely on companies to give them the training. Oh, no one's training me. And I have very little sympathy for those people who get left behind because nobody trained them. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, what did you do on nights and weekends? Well, that's my time. Okay. But as the world passes you by, you may have wanted to make some different decisions, right? I mean, get some additional training, but I think that's, I know this isn't a Dr. Phil. My name is Phil. So maybe it is a Dr. Phil session. I don't know. I have a master's degree, but nobody calls me that. But anyway, I think that staying on top of things, and I think the best example that I could give personally was, when JSON actually came out, we were using SOAP protocols and XML formats, and all of a sudden, I saw people using JSON, using REST services, and writing JavaScript to work with JSON files. And for probably 4 to 6 months, I sat there just quietly, didn't really understand it. I realized that I better understand this real fast, and I did. I spent nights and weekends. It didn't take long. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden I was up to speed and leading things again, and it's not that big of a leap. And it may be painful to learn for some people, new technology, absolutely necessary. Mm-hmm. And I think quite honestly, not only are you doing yourself a disservice, but really, I think you're doing your customers a disservice if you're not staying on top of the game. Mm-hmm. Yep. I don't know if we have additional questions. I mean, quite honestly, like this kind of stuff, when it comes to modernization, is something I could talk a lot about.
So let me pull the audience. I wasn't really sure if anybody in the audience has any questions. Go ahead and either chime in via audio or just type them into the chat. I don't believe I see any chat activity, but let us know if you have any other questions, because I think right now we're about 10 minutes away from closing. So I don't know if we have, we can answer the Q&A portion at this point.
And we could do musings. We could definitely do Q&A, and I'm trying to think if there's anything. That's what I was actually looking forward to, some questions, and that's why I left a lot more time for questions, because this is a topic that a lot of times people really want to. Some people like to talk about what they've done well. I was hoping to hear maybe a couple stories of what has gone well for people. And I appreciate the question that we had earlier, because that's a lot of people right now are modernizing it, and a lot of times questions are very. You can give a broad information like this, but that only goes so far. Sometimes you really need personalized information because your environment is going to be different than somebody else's.
Okay. Sounds good. Danny, do you have any other questions or anything that comes up to mind? Things that you've done with previous customers or clients?
Yeah, not off the top of my head.
One of the questions that I thought I would be, interested in hearing, from some of the audience members is how far along is modernization within their organizations?
Right.
Because I think that there's a whole spectrum of things. I mean, there are companies that are continuously modernizing, right? Whereas others don't modernize very often at all. And, those are the ones that kind of get left behind, because at some point there is just so much momentum to overcome in trying to get started. And they have a huge task at hand because they haven't really done much modernization at all. And I seem to think that, usually, those companies are the ones that are right now are struggling the most, because they started with something that they thought would be around for a long time. And it already has been over 60 years since they've been, with those same legacy systems and applications. And, really at this point, I really don't think that there's anything easy, especially if they don't have proper documentation. None of their applications are, have the proper logs to begin troubleshooting and trying to figure out how they work, and maybe try to replicate them with a newer proven technology. And these are all the different kinds of struggles. And it's almost like once you start assessing an organization, it's almost like you need to get deep down layer by layer. It's almost like peeling an onion, that you take away the top layer and then you go to the next layer and then peel that, and then you find another layer until you get to the root causes to, the data that you really want to keep and maintain. And how is it that you're going to move that into a cloud environment where now you can, interconnect it in real time with more modern applications. And, I see that as a process that is a lot more complex than just straight maintenance and support of more modern applications.
So I think you can do top-down modernization, which you and I have both spoke for years. And in fact, I quit using the term digital transformation because I just gave up on it. Nobody knew what it meant. And in the last year, it seems like people are starting to use it. Like all of a sudden, they found some new word to start using, and it's like, okay, this has been around for a long time. So to me, that would be top-down modernization. Digital transformation, the mindset, having that right CIO, calling the right shots. Management who supports it. And some organizations, and in fact, I think quite a few organizations are using more of a bottom-up modernization approach. And what that could look like in Uma, when you asked me the previous question, this was something we're currently designing for a customer. And they have a process that has an intake process, and the form itself has 50 plus fields on it. And it's just boom, boom. It's not organized. It's just like somebody just dump fields onto a form, and they get very. So they don't get good data quality, and that in part is because of it. And you can't get away from the tool because the tool is so ingrained. So what we actually did was designed what if we are able to modernize the intake? And every now and then people have to review the data that they've submitted as well. So what if you modernize that intake form and the review process, And you just have a little API layer here that now once you're done, you submit it. That API layer knows how to translate it to the old system. Is not necessarily where you would want to start if you were doing a top-down modernization, but it is a way to add value quickly without having to make tons of changes all over the place. And the beauty of that design is it actually plugs into the existing architecture. So there's no changes. You just plug it in, people start using it. And so there's that type of approach as well, instead of trying to change everything at once. And I know people would not necessarily prescribe that, right? Even from a top-down approach, you're going to have a roadmap and you're going to look at what you want to modernize when. But for teams that need to add value now, that could also be a way that things can work nicely. So I don't know if you have any experience with what I don't know if that's an industry term. That's just what I call bottom-up modernization.
Got it. Yeah, no, I myself have not been in organizations that get stuck with a lot of legacy systems. And as I mentioned in the introduction, I think really this is a problem for organizations that adopted and they were actually growing in adoption of technology, back in the days of the mainframe, right? This is when the VAXes and the digital equipment mainframes were out, and then IBM is a big part of that as well. And all of that kind of created all these legacy applications that are based on languages that have been around for over 60 years now, and very few developers that even know either how those applications work or even know how to make the changes in the native languages that were written on, because they're not around anymore. There's not enough of that work going on right now to actually maintain developers that still understand that language or know how to program in that language. And I think that's the biggest thing, because often it means that you have to translate going from the native language, which is now legacy and not enough people understand it, to newer languages and even newer systems. And it's not a one-to-one correspondence. It's like the mapping is different all over the place, depending on how you define the architecture of that infrastructure.
I mean, absolutely right. And if you add two more layers onto that and I think you touched on this already, you don't have documentation. You don't have, a lot of these places don't have the original requirements. So how do you know what it was intended to do? You can see what it's doing, but how do you know what it was intended to do? And quite honestly, and I've experienced this for 10 years plus already, is with some of these legacy systems, they don't actually have the source code anymore. So we have an application that's running in the closet somewhere. It just does what it does. And, nobody knows what the source code is. So what do you do there? I mean, to some degree, you can reverse engineer it, or you can decompile it with decompilers. But those aren't going to give you necessarily the original. And so you can go, you can move forward with that. It's probably the best thing that you can do. But at the same time, how do you know you have all the edge cases covered? Yeah,
because you're right. I mean, the other thing is that they don't have an archive of the source code before compiling. And so all they have is the compiled applications, not necessarily the latest and greatest source code.
Right.
And that's, I think, is one of the issues. I do want to shift and give a chance for those in the audience if they want to ask any questions, because we are getting to the end, and before we wrap up, are there any other questions, either here in the room or in the online audience? With that, I'd like to thank you, Philip, for joining us and having this great discussion. And for those of you who are joining us, here's how you can get a hold of Philip. And Philip, maybe you can tell them a little bit more about what some of the ways they can get a hold of you. If anybody has any questions or wants to reach out to you.
Sure. I actually don't see this slide, so I was gonna maybe just turn around real quick. Okay. Those are actually really the best way, especially email address. The PCMillis@Intelligent.com is going to be a great way to reach out. Connect with me on LinkedIn is also good. And we actually do set up on request. We do provide demos for people around what we're doing on infrastructure as code. The log monitoring and the log analytics with Prometheus, Grafana, Influx. So we actually have demos set up like that, for AWS and Azure. If you want to see how easy it is to actually look at these scripts, run these scripts, and all of a sudden just have your environment stood up and ready to go, we do that on request. So anybody, you reach out, happily set up a meeting and have a conversation.
Great. And for those of you in the audience, that's the website for Simtelligent. Also, Philip's email address if you want to get a hold of him. And you can also follow Simtelligent on Twitter. You can also take a look at their company page on LinkedIn, and they also have a page on Facebook as well. So with that, this is Sector. And once again, Philip, thanks for a great discussion. And we'll be sharing this entire video with everyone who signed up. So be on the lookout. You'll be getting a link via email and getting information as to where you can view the playback for tonight's discussion. So I'd like to thank all of you, and we hope to see you again. Our next meetup will be in September, and we're still looking right now for a topic and speaker. So right now we're in discussions as to what we're going to do, and so stay tuned. And we'll be announcing also if there's any venue changes, we'll be announcing those also ahead of time. So be on the lookout for that. But our intent is to continue to the rest of the year, continue to meet as any kind of safety and health guidelines permit, and do hybrid meetings the rest of the year until the end of 2021. So with that, I want to thank all of you for attending, and we hope to see you again at our next meetup. Thank you so much.